From Cape Town, this is the Voice of the Cape, 91.3 FM.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the airwaves of the Voice of the Cape. If you just tuned in on 91.3 FM stereo, 89.8, 90.9, 95.8, as well as www.vocfm.co.za. My name is Muhammad Fasih Peterson, and with you with a very special edition of the show. Tonight we'll be speaking about governance, an Islamic perspective, and this is in line with a 10-part online course that will be offered by the Islamic Peace College of South Africa. And a very special guest will be joining me all the way from Canada, and also we'll be speaking to an official from IPSA to talk about the importance of not only the impact of this course, but also the logistics around that as well. Well, my two guests, the guests that will be joining me from IPSA, I will have Mu'alima Masnouna, and then also we will be joined by a special guest all the way, as I mentioned, from Canada, and that is, of course, Professor Basma Abdelgafar. And before I greet her, let me first just share with you some of her bio. Dr. Basma Abdelgafar is a professor of public policy. She consults and provides training internationally on policy, governance, and Muslim affairs. Dr. Abdelgafar has worked in the Canadian federal government, academia, and the third sector, which is the NGO public sector. She has contributed to the Department of Graduate Studies in Public Policy at the American University in Cairo, Qatar Foundation, and the International Peace College of South Africa. So it's not her first outing with IPSA. And she was the founding head of the Public Policy in Islam Master's Program at the Qatar Faculty of Islamic Studies at Hamad bin Khalifa University. She has a keen interest in research and teaching in public policy and governance in Islam, as well as in Muslim history, thought institutions, and communities. I won't go too deep because there's a lot to read here, and I'd like to get to my guest online. So, Dr. Abdelgafar, assalamu alaikum, and welcome to VOC.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me.
Ma'am, it's a pleasure, absolute pleasure for us to have you, and definitely an important discussion that you'll be having in this 10-part online course. But before we get to that, I've mentioned some of your bio, but maybe if you could just put into context who Dr. Abdelgafar is.
Wow. Well, somebody very interested and engaged with the Quran and the Sunnah, if I would put myself in a nutshell. And that has meant a certain journey throughout my life, from my undergrad years up until the moment that we're speaking now. So that love for the Quran and Sunnah has really always pulled me back in that direction, despite the fact that obviously I was raised in Canada and I studied in Western institutions. There's always been this longing for how we can introduce and contribute the beauty of Islam to the various facets of life, and in my case, to policy and governance.
Now, Dr. Abdelgafar, I think, it's important for us, as I mentioned, to have these conversations, because would you agree that amongst ourselves as Muslims, and particularly when I refer to ourselves, both yourself and myself as Muslims are living in what would be termed Western democracies, very liberal democracies, and sometimes Muslims in these environments sometimes feel out of place, those with a very traditional view of what a Muslim's role would be in a non-Muslim setting. So how important would you say engagements like these are to change the perspective of Muslims?
Well, I think they're absolutely critical. Me personally, I don't view the world as Muslim, non-Muslim, or as East-West, or as Islamic-West, or even as, secular, non-secular. I believe that Islam is a force that is always present. It is present in our history. It is present at the moment, and it will continue to be present until the end of time. And so, to me, Muslims have to understand Islam in that way, with its universal contributions. Justice, peace, mercy, prosperity, growth, development, sustainability. All of these things are part of the Islamic paradigm and part of our thinking in policy and governance. And so Muslims come to the table from the very beginning with that shared perspective. But they also add a very important twist. Our belief, for instance, our uncompromising belief in Tawheed, which is not only, the belief in one God, that obviously is what it means, but that translates into a way of life that connects and integrates all created matter. And we bring that to the table. We bring that understanding and that necessity, along with some other very important concepts that we'll probably discuss in this program.
Now, the other thing is, obviously, what you're mentioning is that Muslims can contribute richly because of that grounding. But broadly, if we look at religiosity featuring in political thought and planning, would you say that in our modern society, we haven't seen as much of an interest in the inclusion of faith-based communities when it comes to political, should I say, aspirations and shaping policies globally that would affect both the Muslim and non-Muslim world?
Yes, I certainly agree with that. And that is part of the challenge for, first of all, religious people, generally speaking, but Muslims in particular. Again, one of the misconceptions I think that the world has come to accept as a given is that the non-religiosity is a non-religion. And that is not the case. The secular in its diverse forms is a religion or forms of religion. They're systems of belief. And we have to see that. We have a different system of belief, and there are multiple systems of belief even within Islam. There's a basic foundation that we all agree to, but there's different interpretations and different ways of living out our faith. So if we saw that the systems of belief, the mindsets that people come with to organizations and to issues, whether local or regional or global, have a grounding in a specific system of belief, and we have a grounding as well, I think we would be more confident in how we prefer our advice and our contribution than we currently are. We have to stop seeing the other side as neutral. It is not a neutral space. If it were a neutral space, then our contributions would be more easier to make. We wouldn't have to struggle as much with the idea that we're bringing contributions that are rooted in Islam to the table as we currently are.
Now, I wanted to just quickly go through the course outline, some of the topics that you've chosen or the headings that you've chosen, and obviously these are what people can expect, and a little bit later on when we get Muallim Masnoor to join us, we will run through the logistics of the course, but just looking at it, the governance in Islamic perspective is the name of the course. The state of governance today globally is one aspect, the need for revelational guidance, number 3 being studying governance and policy in the Quran and Sunnah, number 4 being citizenship, government, business and civil, and authority and leadership, number 5 essential elements of public policy in Islam, which will be spread over 4 sessions, and number 7 year, but which will be the 10th one, is working together for a better future. Now, it's interesting you mentioned citizen, government, business and civil, and particularly business, and I want to focus on that. I want to talk maybe about capitalism and governance and the impact that it's had, comparing this with the objectives of Islam, because obviously we know that the Islamic model leaves no room for capitalism at the cost or expense of the citizen, of the ordinary citizen. So what can we as Muslims bring to the discussion in as far, and I'm probably sketching a very obvious scenario, but what can we bring to the discussion in terms of better economic systems for, should I say, the Western world?
Oh, this question is incredible. Well, first I have to mention that designing this course was a very interesting process for me, very deep process and high learning curve, because of the pervasiveness of the idea of governance and the extensive reach of state policy. Governance, of course, is not just the state. Business enters into it, civil society enters into it. But let's just say that the state still commands much of the authority, especially in the promulgation of law and regulations and matters of this nature. So it was quite an interesting process, deciding what would go into the syllabus and the points that I felt I wanted to cover with participants. I always have this idea in the back of my mind that if I were to only ever have one conversation with somebody, what would I want to tell them? And so that all entered into the design of this course. And in your question, which is really, I'm actually very impressed that you picked especially on the economics, because we have generally a weakness in this issue, both in our history and in our scholarship. For our viewers that have studied public policy or administration or governance, mostly in Western institutions, now obviously, all over the world, because there's this really assimilation of different knowledge systems, you'll find that the core subject is economics when we study policy, because it is so important to how governments operate. It's so important to the welfare of societies, and to employment, to sustainable development. I don't like the word growth. I think that the emphasis on growth is very problematic and has gotten us into some really difficult situations with the environment. But the idea of economics is very important. How do we grow a healthy economy? How do we ensure that it is sustainable? What are the Islamic contributions that we can make to the discourse today in the hopefully post-COVID economies that are reconsidering many of their tenets? And we have some really important principles in Islam. Some of them are doable. Others are a bit more challenging in the capitalist system, like, for instance, the prohibition of interest. And to my mind, we don't have much leeway in Islam. I am not one of those people that think that, it's a percentage above a certain amount, like some scholars have justified it to be. I believe a prohibition is a prohibition, and I think that there's growing agreement in the non-Islamic literature of the problem of the interest-based system, or the financialization of our system. Part of that problem is that when we have interest, it is unearned income, and it stresses the earth's resources. And we need, as Muslims, to begin looking seriously at that, not just saying we have a prohibition, but to look at the maqasid. Why do we have that prohibition? We normally go, we have the prohibition because it burdens the poor. Of course it does. And because it is unearned income. Of course it is. But we're reaching greater and greater understandings now of the detrimental nature that interest has on our environment and on uninhibited growth and on extreme wealth that also leads to destruction of the ecosystems within which we live. So we have a massive contribution to make in the economic regard, but we're still really in the early stages. We'd have to take it a lot more seriously.
Well, latched onto that, obviously we've seen how bad economic policy can ravage economies and lead to what is essentially recession or depression. I mean, all the way through from the 1920s, we have various intervals in history where bad economic policy driven by usury and greed, and just that sense of what we're talking about, unearned, income or unearned profiteering has caused a collapse of the monetary system, and we've seen that, but yet governments across the world continue to embrace the system. And here we find Islam providing an alternative solution, one that is even now being embraced by non-Muslim communities, seeing the viability and the robustness of economic Sharia-compliant products that kind of fare much better in the market. What would you say that discussion can bring, and that option can bring, to not only enriching economies and strengthening economies, but also changing the way that Islamic models are perceived by Western counterparts?
I listened to your question, and honestly, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is we have to do a better job. Yes, Islam does offer alternatives, but we haven't scaled them up sufficiently. And we haven't, for instance, in the case of Islamic economics and finance, we haven't adequately combined those fields with policy so that they have the supportive ideas, other points of pressure or other leveraging points within a system of governance that could ease their implementation within a society. We also need to up our game in explaining this to the public. A very important aspect of public policy is persuasion. To persuade, to carry people with you, to have them come to an agreement that this is potentially a better alternative. We also, as Muslims, when we're talking about policy, have to better combine our understanding of halal and tayyib. So all of these concepts, it's not just the prohibition of interest, but it's also the products and the services that we're providing. They have to be permissible, but they also have to be tayyib. They have to be good. They have to be wholesome. They have to be beneficial. We have to do a better job at that. We have to do a better job in agriculture, in farming, in marketing. Marketing is a very big part of this. We can revive our institution of awqaf, and we can encourage the rich to provide greater support to these charitable institutions so that they can once more regain the historical function that they had. So we do have these alternatives, but we have to talk through, and we have to upscale them, and we have to carry the public with us as we're doing this.
The voice of Dr. Basma Abdelgafar, and we're having a very important discussion around Islamic governance. That's also the title of a course, a 10-part course hosted by IPSA, which she will be presenting online. When we come back after this break, we'll continue, and I'd like to get Mu'alima Masnouna from IPSA in to talk about the course itself, its structure, the intake, and how and when you can apply and when the closing date is, inshallah. We'll be talking about that after this break. Stay with us.
Live from Cape Town, this is the Voice of the Cape, 91.3 FM.
91.3 FM stereo, the Voice of the Cape. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. We're talking about IPSA's Governance and Islamic Perspective 10-part online course hosted by international scholar, and she is Dr. Basma Abdelgafar, and another guest who joins us from IPSA. She is the Postgraduate Academic Administration and Quality Assurance Officer, Mu'alima Masnouna. Mu'alima, assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran for having me in the studio.
It's a pleasure, ma'am, and definitely I think a course that has so much meaning and so much benefit for us as Muslims, particularly in this Western world, and at a time where there's opposing views on the matter of whether Muslims should or should not be participating in Western-style democracies. And I think this opens our eyes to exactly what Islam is really saying about the matter. Just in terms of the course outline and the intake, first of all, how long will this course be running for? And is there still opportunity for people to apply if they'd like to be part of this?
Well, Fasih, the course will be offered over 5 weeks, twice a week. It will be offered online. The course commences from the 15th of February, inshallah, so it will be offered on a Monday and Wednesday evening. And yes, applications are still open, and students can definitely still apply. They can apply via its website. There's a quick link for them to access and submit an online application.
Okay. And just in terms of the process and procedure, you're saying that it will be hosted twice weekly. So Is there a specific time, or would you be able to access the material and watch it at your own leisure?
The live broadcast or offering of the program is from 5:30 till around 8:30, but it certainly can be watched subsequent to the live broadcast.
Okay, fantastic. And in terms of, as we mentioned, the course structure, we have 10 topics here that will be covered. What is the length or the time period for each course? Are we looking at an hour, 45 minutes?
Well, considering the lecture itself would probably be an hour, hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes, and engagement with the students is also included. Thus, we're looking at something like 2 hours or so, inshallah.
Well, I think fantastic. I mean, at a time where we are yearning to get back to institutions and learn and study in various fields, and particularly when it comes to something that touches on the Islamic, definitely, I think that people will jump at the opportunity. So you've mentioned that people can go and register now online at the IPSA website. Could you just give that website address once again?
Website address is www.ipsa-edu.org, and it's readily accessible to anyone who follows that website address. The current face of the website has the poster of Dr. Basma's module that will be offered as on the 15th of February, and below the poster is a quick link that the applicant can just click on and go to the online application page.
Fantastic. I want to go back to Dr. Basma Abdelgafar very quickly, because I know our time is running quite short. One of the things that I also wanted to touch on is I see that you're going to be spending 4 sessions on the essential elements of public policy in Islam. Why is this such a critical discussion?
I believe this is really the core that we should be having in the course, and that's why we're spending 4 classes on it. And the reason for that is something you have outlined so correctly throughout this discussion, which is that Muslims have to become engaged. Those that are engaged can become engaged more effectively, and those that aren't engaged should begin to reconsider. And so those 4 dimensions of public policy in Islam, and public policy, just for our listeners, is a course of action or inaction that public authorities can take to address a specific problem or take advantage of an opportunity. Now, when we posit that or we qualify it within Islam, we have to explain what that means. And essentially what we'll be studying in this course is that means 4 key things. The first thing is Tawheed, as I mentioned earlier, or the belief in unity, the unity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then the unity of the universe that He created for our welfare and our benefit and our hopefully happy livelihoods. The second is Maqasid, or the objectives or purposes of the Sharia, and this goes beyond the classical classification of the preservation of religion, life, mind, progeny, wealth, and dignity to explore other Maqasid that are necessary for policy and governance. The use of Maqasid also allows us to look at those areas of the revelation that aren't so clear-cut when we're simply looking at the Quran and Sunnah or considering only the rulings or ahkam. From there, we look at the concept of shura, which is the third critical element. And shura can be traditionally thought of as consultation, but I think increasingly our understanding is leading us to a collective decision-making mechanism. And that collective decision-making, again, is a prompt, is an encouragement, is an exhortation for Muslims to become more involved in areas where they have a stake, where they're interested, or where they simply want to voice an important opinion. And finally, the 4th element is islah, or rectification. And that is very important because our understanding of Tawheed our use of maqasid, our utilization and understanding of maqasid, and how this goes through a process of shura must inevitably have an outcome of islah, and that is to increase benefits or to minimize harms, or to have what I call eliminatory policies to take care of the dangers and the things that are negatively impacting our lives, not just us, but other forms of creation as well, or to be creative, which is to step into that domain of how do we take advantage of the beauty and the mercies that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us so that we can enjoy our lives and progress. So those four elements are the heart of public policy in Islam, and they are the meaning of that qualifier.
One of the things that I just wanted to ask, and I think we only have a minute or two left, and so I didn't know how far we're going to get in answering this question, but you spoke about Maqasid al-Sharia, and I think maqsad or objective in Islam is so key to understanding how broad the deen is, and everything is well thought out. Would you say that the lack of education amongst Muslims sometimes creates this traditionalist view or this popular view that the Islamic and the secular are separate? Islam puts them very much separate, and there's this idea of I won't touch that is batil, because the reality is we're not really understanding what the objectives of Islam is within any dimension that we are either looking at or engaging in.
Let me try to put this in very terse terms because of our time. We have to distinguish, and we do indeed in the course, between the faith aspect of Islam and the fact that it is a very comprehensive deen. And deen is slightly different than religion, but a way of life. So Islam is very comprehensive. The worship aspect is one aspect of that. And so we have a lot in common, and there are many, many bridges with the world, if we're going to identify it as secular. But at the same time, again, I said that division I don't like, because if there's justice on one side, it's going to be justice on the other. If there's truth on one side, it's going to be truth on the other. So a truth is a truth, no matter where we see it. And justice is justice, no matter where we see it. And so this is where maqasidi thinking is very important, to be purposeful in our approach and to just reach that conclusion that if we're not engaged, we're missing out. If we don't understand the criticalness of governance and policy in our lives today, especially in this COVID world, where we're seeing so many decisions being made that literally impact life and death. We have to be engaged, and we have to understand how that plays out in our own religion, in our own deen, and the commands that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides for us so that we have that kind of guidance.
Dr. Basma Abdelgafar, shukran so much for joining us. I think we have run out of time, but there's so many things I wanted to ask you. This is a discussion that I think we can have for a very, very long time, particularly because not only is the subject matter in terms of the modern world so rich, but just how well thought out the Islamic model is, and how it can benefit society as a whole, whether it was 1400 years ago or in the 21st century. Those benefits are still there, subhanAllah. Really a deen of mercy, a way of life in a sense. Shukran so much once again for joining us. We look forward to the course which will be taking place online. That's on ipsa-edu.org. Mu'alima Masnoona Kamali from IPSA, as well as Dr. Abdelgafar. Shukran so much once again for joining us. Please do stay safe, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam.
Well, that's it from myself, Mohammed Fasih Peterson. You can check out the course details on IPSA's website. It will be running from the 15th of February, so you still have some time if you want to enroll. And it will be twice weekly or bi-weekly for about 5 weeks, inshallah. I mean, of course, there will be live sessions as well for you to engage. So please do make an effort to get in on this discussion. I think as Muslims finding ourselves in the Western world, it is even more important for us to understand the dynamics of this interaction and how and where we fit in. And also, again, we spoke about the fact that Islam is so much broader than we sometimes see, and broader than our world view. view and vision. Ironically, we're Muslims, but sometimes we don't have the whole picture because of that lack of knowledge. And this is a way for us to improve and increase in that knowledge, inshallah. I want to say a big shukran once again to my guest. Big shukran to Umar. I bid you wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.